Oh, good mornings, ladies and gentlemen. It is a big day here. We are going to go through and look at some of these underdog pickems. Now, of course, the main reason we are looking at these is so we can go through and get a sense of updated realistic projections for our starting lineups tomorrow. A few of these actually did change from earlier in the week, so let's go ahead and dive in. Now, Patrick Mahomes obviously will have more than half a total yard. That's just the underdog pick'em promo if you sign up with code FLOCK. That doesn't really tell us anything. But starting off with Russ, I mean, they actually have Russ at 224.5 passing yards. This should be a higher game if you're looking at Las Vegas over-unders. However, if we are looking at the Broncos offense in particular, I mean, what we have seen is that they are going to run the ball and try to limit Russ in a way similar to when he had success in Seattle way back in the day. So I think with that and Javonte turning into a 3-down workhorse, they have Javonte 80.5 total yards. You have to start Javonte. Nobody else in this offense is too exciting. If you were going to start someone else, though, it would be Courtland Sutton. While, yes, Sutton's been great, he's been primarily fueled off of touchdown volume. And those touchdowns probably won't be there, right? We know touchdowns are extremely volatile. That's why they have him as a 1.75x multiplier for him to score a touchdown this week. But you're going to start Javonte, possibly Sutton, if you have a few players on bye. And then I do not care about any of these defensive guys. I apologize. Now, CJ Stroud, they have a 262.5 passing yards. Obviously, this is going to be someone that you're starting. We're trying to start as many of these Houston Texans as we can. We're going to go ahead. We're going to play Devin Singletary as well, based off Singletary having that large workload last week, even with Dameon Pierce in this offense. And then also, if you're looking at the receivers, you have no Dalton Schultz in this offense. Noah Brown's still banged up as well. We don't know yet if Noah Brown's going to play or not, but they have Nico Collins at 57.5 receiving yards. I wouldn't even mind looking at the more than there, especially with Tank Dell not at 100%. But you're going to start Tank Dell, you're going to start Nico Collins, both regardless. Now, going over to Jahmyr Gibbs, they have Gibbs at 43.5 rushing yards, 27.5 receiving yards. So I don't want to reiterate with Gibbs, if you're playing in a non-PPR format, it is difficult to be super excited about throwing him out there, right? But in a full PPR league based off his receiving volume, I'm just fully locked and loaded for Jahmyr Gibbs to be a top 10 running back every single week. David Montgomery will also be someone that we're starting every single week just based off how good this offense is. They have David Montgomery at even odds to score a touchdown right now. So going with Montgomery, it's almost like the opposite, right? You want Montgomery in that non-PPR format. Whereas receiving role, they only have him at 6.5 receiving yards. He's probably not going to catch the ball. Amon-Ra St. Brown, they have at 82.5 total yards. We are actually able to go through and snag that at 79.5 receiving yards earlier in the week, which is really nice. Obviously, you start Amon-Ra St. Brown regardless. I mean, that's not going to be a big question there. Jameson Williams, no interest. Sam Laporta, we're going to start. I wouldn't mind also if you wanted to take advantage of the 1.75x multiplier with Sam Laporta to score a touchdown. I mean, I think if you're making that one consolidated bet that the Detroit Lions offense is going to be better than people expect, I mean, you could. Now, with New Orleans, really none of these pick'ems are going to be updated. We're going to start Kamara no matter what. The reason why you don't have a ton of pick'em options with the Saints right now is just because we don't have the clarity on what's going to happen with Chris Olave. Once we know about Olave, then we will have a much better idea here. Going over to Miami, you actually have the Dolphins with the highest implied team total of any team in the NFL, according to Las Vegas Sportsbooks. So Tua is at 277.5 passing yards. We're starting Tua if we can. It's actually higher than CJ Stroud. And then Tyreek Hill's at 99.5 total yards. We were able to get this early in the week at 91.5 total yards. So I hope y'all are able to follow us on that. And then now, honestly, I don't think it's too late if you want to go out there and take a piece of this Miami Dolphins offense. Like we said, they do have the highest implied team total of any team in the NFL. So I would be looking at Tyreek Hill to score a touchdown at even odds here. And of course, if you want to check out any of these pick'ems over on Underdog Fantasy, find that link in the live chat, in the description, in the comment section. Promo code FLOCK, 100% deposit match, plus our rest of season fantasy football rankings and tiers. And a Patrick Mahomes special pick'em, more than less than half a total yard, ladies and gentlemen. Going to get all that with code FLOCK, and find that link in the comment section. But let's move this along. Jalen Waddle, I mean, we saw last week. You start Waddle every single week, right? Great offense. I'm going to start as many guys as we can. They don't have the pick'ems out for Mostert and Achane just yet, but Achane is going to be playing. So I personally would go ahead. I am planning on playing both Achane as well as Raheem Mostert. I'm ranking both as mid RB2s. It's a phenomenal matchup against Washington. They're both averaging RB1 stat lines this season. Obviously, that doesn't mean they'll continue to do that going forward. Now, going over to the Washington side, they have Brian Robinson at 39.5 rushing yards, 12.5 receiving yards. You have Antonio Gibson good to go. Plus is a matchup where you're a 10-point dog. So it's difficult to be super, super excited here about Brian Robinson. McLaurin, you're going to get some garbage time volume. So you can start McLaurin. No interest really in Samuel. No interest in Jahan Dotson. Really the only guy that I'm starting with confidence this week, and it's not even super confident, is going to be Terry McLaurin. Now, going over to Indy, you'll see they have Minshew at 235.5 passing yards. So I do think he's a viable streamer. And also, Zach Moss is why we look at these pickems so you can see these projections. They have at 98.5 total yards. Now, while I think that may be a little bit aggressive against a decent Tennessee Titans rush defense, while yes, Zach Moss had a blow-up game earlier in the season against this Titans rush defense, he currently has, I believe, the second highest underdog pick'em, only behind Christian McCaffrey this week. So I don't mind going through and taking the fewer than 98.5 total yards for Zach Moss. But with that being said, you have to start him. We initially ranked him, I want to say, as like RB12. And then in those flex rankings, we ended up having to move him up to like RB7. Like he's a mid RB1. You have to start Zach Moss. Going over to the receivers, Michael Pittman Jr. definitely starting. They have Josh Downs like 51.5 receiving yards, right? So, I mean, they have definitely someone you can start, but a little bit lower than someone like Cortland Sutton, a little bit lower than someone like Terry McLaurin. Going over to Tennessee, we don't care about Will Levis. Really, the only guy you're looking at is Derrick Henry. They have Derrick Henry at 76.5 receiving yards. And with Henry there, I mean, it's kind of tough in that if the Indianapolis Colts blow the Tennessee Titans out, then Derrick Henry is just simply not getting there, right? So it kind of does come down to what do you expect from an overall game flow environment? And we are actually able to get DeAndre Hopkins at fewer than 57.5 receiving yards early in the week. Now, if you were going to be going with more than yardage totals on DeAndre Hopkins, do not take the 54.5 total yards. If you were going to go with the more than total yards on Hopkins, just go with the 51.5 receiving yards. Obviously, it's hard to project out Hopkins to have any usage as a rusher. So I would not go with the more than. I'm just saying if you were, stay away from the total yards on Hopkins. Just go with the receiving. And if you were going to go fewer than, then we would go total yards. I'm not worried about them giving Hopkins a jet sweep or anything. Now going over to Arizona, you actually have an implied team total of like 18 points. So, I mean, while I kind of want to bet on a bounce back from this offense, it is a little bit difficult to do just that. Looking at Kyler, you do have 29.5 rushing yards for his pick'em. So if you really want to start him based on the rushing upside, you can. We don't have any news really with Hollywood Brown right now. So there aren't a ton of pick'ems for us to look at. We were able to get James Conner at minus 61.5 receiving yards early in the week, which is really nice. He's fallen down to 52.5. You should probably stay away now. While, yeah, this offense is much better in Pittsburgh, they still have Kenny Pickett for fewer than 200 passing yards. They met 194.5 passing yards. So if we were looking at streaming options, I would say definitely you're better off going with like the Gardner Minshew, right? And then going over to going over to the running backs, it's a great matchup against Arizona, but they have Najee at even odds for a touchdown. I mean, I don't know. I would way rather take Tyreek Hill to have a touchdown and Najee to have no touchdown if they're going to be at even odds. So I'm going to go ahead and take fewer than half a rushing touchdown or half a receiving touchdown for Najee Harris. I'm honestly not too interested in anybody here in Pittsburgh. Like, I really hope Freiermuth has another blow-up spot for our best ball teams, and obviously we desperately need it. Desperately need it. But I don't know. I don't want to start anybody, even if it's a good matchup. Going over to the Chargers, Justin Herbert, must-start guy. Doesn't matter if he has. The Chargers have been disappointing this year. Austin Eckler, must-start guy. Doesn't matter if he's been disappointing. Keenan Allen, must-start guy. Doesn't matter if he's been disappointing. Nobody else in this offense you are playing outside of the trifecta. Now, going over to New England, you have Ramondre Stevenson at 89.5 total yards. And Ramondre has been trending in the right direction from a usage perspective. I wouldn't mind going with the fewer than 89.5 total yards for Ramondre Stevenson in this game if Ezekiel Elliott were to miss. Right now, it looks like Zeke may play. If you have no Zeke, though, you need to stay away. And obviously, Ramondre Stevenson's a must-start guy. But if Zeke plays, I still think you start Ramondre Stevenson, particularly in a full PPR format. But for him to have a pick him like 10 yards higher than Bijan Robinson, I just don't agree with it. I would rather go with the fewer than 89.5 total yards for Madre, more than 79.5 total for Bijan, under the assumption that Ezekiel Elliott does play. But both these guys are going to be running backs you are starting, right? And then we're not really playing anybody else in this offense. Drake London can be a viable play if you are desperate. Now going over to the Jets, Breece Hall is still going to get every single touch. So you still have to start him. Garrett Wilson's going to get like 10 targets out of this offense. So even if this is like the worst offense or close to the worst offense in the NFL, actually, Vegas is telling us the Jets will be better than Carolina this week. Still, I think you have to start Garrett Wilson based off volume. I mean, it's kind of like Adam Thielen, right? Just a younger, better version of Thielen. Where Thielen may have 61.5 receiving yards. You're going to get dominant volume in a horrendous offense. Going over to Tampa, I mean, we're not too interested in Baker. You can stream him if you needed to. Rashad White, top 5 running back this week. You start Rashad White. Mike Evans, I wouldn't mind if you wanted to go through and take the 1.5x multiplier for him to score a touchdown, especially with Godwin being banged up and Godwin potentially not playing this game with the neck injury. And then going over to the Niners, I mean, here you have a bunch of exciting things. Brock Purdy, 249.5 passing yards. Start Brock Purdy if you want. CMC, obviously, highest underdog pick him here to find. Deebo Samuel, they actually have Deebo higher than Brandon Ayuk for their total yards mark this week. George Kittle, 46.5 receiving yards. You start every 49er player and understand that there's a low floor in all of them just because they have to spread the ball around. But I don't know, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know. Just take some volatility there. Going over to Jalen Hurts, I would not mind if you wanted to look at Hurts to have fewer than 1.5 passing touchdowns. The implied team total for this game, for this offense, is only at like 22 points. Las Vegas sportsbooks are telling us that the Philadelphia Eagles will be an average offense this week going up against the best defense in the NFL in the Niners. Now, while I am still starting Jalen Hurts absolutely everywhere based off his rushing upside, and while if this was 1.5 total touchdowns, I would go with the more than 1.5 total touchdowns. We know Jalen Hurts isn't really going to be a quarterback with a ton of passing volume based off his rushing upside, at least typically what we've seen. Keep in mind, Jalen Hurts, one of my most drafted quarterbacks this year. He was my QB1 coming into the season. Love the rushing upside. But in this game, in this environment, with this implied team total, I would not mind going with fewer than 1.5 passing touchdowns against San Fran. We are starting him, though. Obviously, we are starting him. DeAndre Swift, you start, but he's more like mid RB2 rather than an RB1 based off the horrible matchup. You start AJ Brown, but he's like a mid to low end wide receiver 1 instead of a high end wide receiver 1 based off matchup. You start Devonta Smith. Hopefully Dallas Goedert plays, but I don't know. Now going over to Cleveland, you have Joe Flacco in here now. Jerome Ford's at 50.5 rushing yards. Amari's at 48.5. David Njoku's at 44.5. So really the only guy I'd be excited about starting in Cleveland would be David Njoku. I'm not too pumped about anybody else here. Kyron Williams, they have at 91.5 total yards. So Kyron, if you look at all these Pickems, he does project out to be that mid RB1. Have to start Kyron Williams. And then Cooper Kupp, we were actually able to get at minus 64.5 receiving yards earlier in the week. So, I mean, that is something you can no longer snag. Now he's at 57.5 receiving yards. So I think this is a much more reasonable projection. I'm not going to be going with the lower than on Kupp anymore. Puka's slightly behind Kupp. I mean, in reality, I think both guys project out as like low-end wide receiver 2s, mid wide receiver 2s. It's just so damn hard. Then obviously with that, Mahomes, only going to get that if you use code FLOCK, and if you were new to Underdog Fantasy, that more than less than half a total yard. We start Patrick Mahomes regardless. Isaiah Pacheco, they have an even odds score touchdown and 66.5 rushing yards. So, I mean, here you do have massive expectations for Pacheco. Kelsey, you have an even odds score touchdown. That's the same thing every week. And you have Rashee Rice down at 48.5 total yards. So if you wanted to go with more than 48.5 total yards, I want to fault you for Rashee Rice. But to put into context, they have like Terry McLaurin ahead of Rashee Rice. So, I mean, maybe we are a little bit too high on Rice in our rankings, but I don't know. I mean, I'm pretty damn excited, and I just want to get the guy in, you know. Going over to Green Bay, the wide receivers will be volatile. You can start them if you want. In Cincinnati, Joe Mixon, they have it 72.5 total yards. So, I mean, it's a tough spot because you actually have the lowest implied team total for the Cincinnati Bengals of any offense in the NFL this week. Now, with that being said, I still don't mind Jamar Chase to go for more than 57.5 receiving yards if we have no T. Higgins. Hopefully we get an injury update later today. But if we have no T. Higgins, I'm going to be going with more than 57.5 receiving yards for Chase. Going over to Jacksonville, they have Ridley at 57.5 total yards, which is ahead of Christian Kirk by a wide margin here. So maybe we are wrong to rank Kirk ahead of Ridley this week. But ultimately, we are just waiting until we get news with Travis Etienne. And then obviously, if Etienne's good to go, which it looks like he will be, Etienne will be a must-start guy. But I think that's all I have for y'all in this video. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Of course, if you have not done so already, please hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel if you play fantasy football. We'll be live later today. Hook 'em horns. We got the UT helmet on, of course. Big day today. And if you wanted to check out any of those Pickems over on Underdog Fantasy, you find that link in the live chat in the description in the comment section. Promo code FLOG, 100% a positive match, plus our rest of season fantasy football rankings and tiers, and that Patrick Mahomes special Pickem more than less than half a total yard. But real quick, Omar says, morning vlog match currently in a three-way tie. Do I start Keenan with the injury risk or start Downs? Go ahead and play Keenan Allen, my friend. Also, how do you feel about Tua for the playoffs? We have Minshew on the bench. Tua should be in a very good offense in a horrendous stretch of games for the playoffs. It's a really tough matchup. I think you can go through and you can start him if you really wanted to. Peyton, we are going to go Singletary over Cup. Thomas, bow down. Go Huskies. Hook 'em horns, my friend. And then Demetrios says non-BBR, Mixon or Scary Terry. Non-BBR, we're going to go ahead. We will take Mixon. But thank you again, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be answering more questions later tonight. I really do appreciate you. Hook 'em horns, and we'll see you in the stream tonight.